The moment my mother pulled away in her little silver car, heading to her best friend's house in a neighboring town, I felt something shift inside the house. It wasn't just the silence, it was the weight of it. The kind that presses against your chest in the quiet hours of the morning, or clings to the corners of empty rooms. I stood on the porch for a moment longer, arms crossed against the breeze, watching the dust rise as her tires faded into the distance. My stepfather, Drew, stood beside me. He didn't say much, just lifted one hand in a lazy wave as she disappeared. Then, just as casually, he turned to me. "Grab your boots. We've got fence line to check." He was already walking back toward the barn before I could answer. The ranch wasn't exactly what I had in mind when I pictured my summer. But when Drew asked if I'd come with him for a week to help out, his partner had gotten sick and the animals needed care, I didn't really have a reason to say no. College didn't start again until September, and besides, I didn't want to stay home alone with the ghost of my mother's voice echoing through the halls. We'd never been close, Drew and I. At least, not in the way people usually think of family. He came into my life when I was 14, a quiet man with more wrinkles around his eyes than smiles on his face. At the time, I barely registered him beyond his deep voice and the scent of pine that always clung to his shirts. But over the years, things softened. He wasn't trying to be my dad. I appreciated that. He was just there, building things, fixing things, occasionally looking at me with an expression I could never quite read. That first evening at the ranch, I found myself watching him more than I meant to. The way his shoulders moved beneath his flannel, how he paused to listen to the wind before making decisions about the cattle. There was something rugged and deliberate about him that made me uneasy, not because it scared me, but because I wasn't sure what I was feeling. He caught me looking once while we were brushing down one of the horses. "You're quieter than usual," he said without looking up. "Just tired." He didn't respond, just nodded slightly and kept brushing. But I noticed the way his eyes flicked toward me in the reflection of the horse's flank, like he was watching without wanting me to know. The days passed slowly after that, sunrise to sundown, filled with work that left my arms sore and my skin a little sunburned. I'd never shoveled so much hay in my life, never lifted feed bags heavier than my own body weight. But Drew was patient, kind in his own way. He'd hand me a water bottle without asking, fix the bandana slipping from my neck, point out wildflowers with a softness in his voice I wasn't used to hearing. And at night, the stillness crept back in. The house was old and creaked when it breathed. I'd lie in my narrow bed, the window cracked to let in the cool air, and I'd listen for his footsteps down the hall. Sometimes I'd hear them. Sometimes I imagined them. One night I couldn't sleep. I wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water and found him there, shirtless, back turned, rinsing something in the sink. The moonlight hit the muscles of his back just so, and I froze. He turned, slowly, and our eyes met. "You okay?" he asked. Yeah, just thirsty." I watched the way he leaned against the counter, that same unreadable expression on his face. He didn't speak for a moment, and neither did I. The air between us thickened, almost imperceptibly, but I felt it in my chest. Like the house itself was holding its breath. He finally handed me the glass I hadn't even realized he'd filled. Our fingers brushed. I don't know if he noticed, but I did, and I felt it all the way down to my toes. We'd fallen into a strange kind of rhythm at the ranch. Wake early, feed the animals, check the fences, patch what needed patching, and end the day with something simple: dinner, a walk out past the fields, a quiet beer on the porch. But that afternoon, the sky threatened rain, and the chores were done early. The silence inside the ranch house was thick with that lazy kind of boredom you only get when the weather steals the day from you. I was curled up on the old corduroy couch in the den, barefoot, flipping through a tattered paperback I'd found on a shelf. Drew came in with 2 mugs of tea, surprising me. "I thought maybe we could play something," he said, setting the mugs down on the table. "Cards." I shrugged. Sure, but only if you don't get mad when I win. He smirked. We'll see about that. He pulled an old deck from the cabinet, and we sat cross-legged on the carpet like kids. The game started simple, gin rummy at first, then switched to a version he called wish cards. Whoever won a round got to ask for something harmless from the loser. Within reason, he added, one brow arched, teasing. It started light. I won first, asking him to make dinner. He grumbled good-naturedly. Then he won, and told me I had to sing the chorus of a song I liked. I was halfway through a breathless version of a Taylor Swift hit when he beat me again. He leaned back, arms folded behind his head, the edges of his mouth turned up in amusement. All right, my wish. I eyed him suspiciously. Okay, what is it? He didn't answer right away, just tilted his head and looked at me in that way that always made me feel like he was thinking something he wasn't saying. I want you to go out and milk Daisy, he said finally, voice even. I blinked. The cow. He nodded. I laughed. That's your wish. His gaze didn't waver. That's my wish. I don't know why, but I hesitated. It wasn't a big deal. I'd helped around the barn for days. I'd filled troughs, shoveled manure, even helped check hooves. But something about him asking that, the way he watched me as he said it, like he'd already imagined it, sent a strange flutter through my chest. Still I nodded. All right, let's go. The barn was quiet, the scent of hay and dust thick in the air. Daisy stood calmly in her stall, chewing with the lazy patience of a creature who had nothing to prove. I grabbed the stool and the bucket, crouched beside her like Drew had shown me earlier in the week. But this time, he didn't leave. He stayed leaning against the wooden beam, just inside the barn door, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on me in a way that made the back of my neck heat. I tried to focus, grasp, pull, release, but I could feel his gaze on me like the sun pressing against my skin. My hands moved awkwardly at first. The motion felt too intimate somehow, too exposed, and I flushed. Am I doing it wrong? I asked without looking at him. No, he said, voice low. You're doing just fine. I finally glanced up, and his eyes were on me. Not my face exactly, but the whole of me, taking in every movement. He wasn't leering. It wasn't that. But there was a certain tension in his jaw, the kind of restraint that told me he was imagining something else. The realization made me blush furiously. I turned my face away, focusing on the bucket, on the rhythmic sound of milk hitting metal. The barn felt warmer than it should have. The soft shifting of Daisy's weight echoed louder than before, and every brush of my own skin against denim felt amplified. When I finished, I stood up too quickly, nearly spilling the bucket. He stepped forward and steadied it for me, his hand grazing mine in the process. Good job, he said softly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We walked back in silence. His hand lingered a moment longer than necessary as he held the door for me, and my thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. What had that moment been? Just a game? A harmless country chore? Or something that neither of us dared to name? I couldn't tell. But that night, lying in bed listening to the hum of insects outside the window, I replayed it all again, his voice, his gaze, the way my heart had stuttered in my chest. And I realized I wasn't sure who I was anymore in the story we were writing, or who he was to me. The sun rose hard and fast that morning, turning the sky a molten peach above the hills. I woke to the low clatter of movement outside, the steady rhythm of Drew tossing hay from the truck into the barn loft. It was one of those sounds that felt stitched into the ranch's morning routine. Familiar. Grounding. I stretched, sore from the last few days, then padded barefoot to the kitchen to make coffee. The house smelled like wood and dust, and something faintly citrus from the soap he used in the laundry. I caught myself humming as I poured 2 mugs. Just then, his voice rang out through the open window. Could use some water if you've got a free minute. I smiled into the steam rising from the mugs. Always polite, even when bossing me around. I filled a bottle with cold water and stepped outside. The morning was warm already, sunlight spilling golden across the gravel path. The barn door stood wide open, and I could see Drew in the shadows, his shirt damp at the back, the muscles in his arms taut with each swing of the pitchfork. I took a breath and headed toward him. But just as I reached the barn, the toe of my boot caught the edge of the threshold, an uneven slat of what I must have walked over a dozen times without issue, and suddenly my balance vanished. Everything happened in a blur. The water bottle flew from my hand. My arms flailed, and before I could even process the stumble, I was falling straight into him. The world tilted. He scattered in the air like golden confetti, and we landed hard, tangled together in a heap. "Oof," he grunted, his back hitting the hay pile first. My body splayed across his chest. His hands instinctively caught at my waist, steadying me, holding me. For a moment, there was no movement, just the two of us frozen, my chest against his, my hands braced on his shoulders, his breath warm against the side of my face, and that thunderous silence again, heavier than any sound could ever be. Sorry, I gasped, trying to push myself up. But the hay gave beneath my palms, and I slipped slightly, pressing more of myself into him. His grip tightened for the briefest second, not hard, but grounding. His eyes met mine, startled, unreadable, and then something else. Something charged. Neither of us said a word. I could feel every point of contact, his hands, still at my sides, my thighs pressed to his legs, the rise and fall of his breath beneath me. I didn't move right away. I couldn't. My brain felt fogged, like I had stumbled not just through the doorway, but into something far more dangerous. "Are you okay?" he asked finally, his voice low and rough. I nodded, breath catching. "Yeah, just clumsy." His lips twitched like he was fighting a smile. "You sure know how to make an entrance." I laughed, too loud, too fast, and scrambled to my feet, brushing straw from my clothes. My knees wobbled as I stood, the heat in my cheeks almost unbearable. He stayed where he was, propped on one elbow, watching me with an expression I couldn't place. Half amusement, half something heavier. "You dropped the water?" he asked, and it took me a second to realize he was trying to shift the mood back to something lighter. I glanced around. The bottle lay a few feet away, unharmed. "Miraculously, no," I said, retrieving it and holding it out. "Still cold." He took it from me, fingers grazing mine, and sat up slowly. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, but I swore I could see a slight tension in his jaw, like he was still reeling a little too. We didn't say much after that. I helped him finish with the hay, working in silence side by side, every so often stealing glances when he wasn't looking. But I caught him watching me too, more than once, his gaze lingering just a little too long. That night, lying in bed with the window cracked open and the scent of hay still clinging to my skin, I pressed a hand to my chest. The memory of his hands at my waist wouldn't leave me. And deep inside, a thought I didn't want to name curled warm and electric in the dark. The next morning, the ranch was quieter than usual. The sky was washed in pale lavender, the hills barely waking. I stood by the stable fence sipping coffee, watching Drew saddle the horses. His movements were slow, deliberate, like his mind was somewhere else. I knew where mine was. He hadn't brought up the fall in the barn. Neither had I, but it lingered in the air between us like wood smoke, thin, noticeable, impossible to forget once it touched your skin. "Ready?" he asked, nodding toward the trail. I nodded, grateful for the simplicity of the question. "Yep." We rode out in silence for a while, the hooves muffled by the morning dew. The hills rolled around us like something out of a postcard, the long grasses brushing the stirrups, the wind combing through my loose braid. It was peaceful. It was too peaceful. "You've gotten good at this," Drew said finally, glancing at me. "At what?" "Everything," he said with a half smile. "Ranch life. Horses. Putting up with me. I looked over at him, caught off guard. That last one's the hardest, obviously. He chuckled, the sound low and smooth. I figured. We reached the far pasture and dismounted by the fence line. The horses grazed nearby as we sat in the tall grass, passing a thermos of coffee back and forth. There was something about being out there, miles from anything, that made the world feel softer. Honest. He picked at a blade of grass between his fingers, then glanced at me. You ever think about staying longer? My stomach flipped. At the ranch. Yeah. He didn't look at me when he said it. You've got a knack for it. The animals like you. You don't complain. Not even when I make you milk Daisy. I laughed, shaking my head. I did complain. Silently. In my head. I noticed. There was a beat of silence. Then he said, without looking at me, that day in the barn. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. The words hung there, fragile and real. I felt my breath catch, but I didn't look away. You didn't, I said too quickly. I mean not in a bad way. He turned to me then, slowly, like he needed to see the truth of it in my face. His eyes were calm, serious. You sure? I nodded, my heart beating louder than it should have. I think I just wasn't expecting it to feel the way it did. What way was that? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached for the thermos again, just to give my hand something to do. Like the world shifted a little. Just a little. Like everything that was familiar started to look different. He nodded slowly, his gaze steady. Yeah, that's what it felt like to me too. I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't know what it meant that we were sitting here, side by side, talking like this, with the sun rising higher and the fences humming in the wind. I didn't know what it meant that I didn't want the moment to end. Finally, I whispered, do you ever feel like we're just one decision away from crossing some invisible line? He exhaled slowly. Every day this week. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was alive, heavy with awareness and all the things we weren't saying but couldn't quite bury anymore. When we mounted up again, something between us had changed. He didn't have to say it. I felt it in the way he watched me ride ahead, in the pause before he called my name just to make sure I was listening. And I was. Every moment now felt like a quiet unfolding. By late afternoon, the sky had shifted from brilliant blue to a heavy warning gray. The clouds rolled in fast, thick as wool, curling low over the hills. Drew was already in the barn when the first drops fell, hammering the roof in a sudden, rhythmic percussion. I dashed in behind him, breathless and half laughing, my jeans soaked from the sudden downpour. You all right? He asked, brushing rain from his brow. Yeah, I gasped. That storm came out of nowhere. We stood there a moment, catching our breath in the golden brown light of the barn, surrounded by the rustle of restless animals and the smell of hay, earth, and leather. The space felt smaller now, as if the storm had shrunk the world to just us. I'll check the doors, Drew said, grabbing the latch near the back wall. I leaned against a post, catching my breath, when I felt it, a sharp, sudden sting on the inside of my left thigh, just above the knee. Ah! I yelped, jolting upright. Drew turned fast. What happened? I don't know, I said, wincing. Something bit me. He was beside me in 2 steps. Where? I hesitated, my hand hovering near my thigh. High up, like really high. He studied my face, his own unreadable. Can I look? My breath hitched, but I nodded. I turned, lowering my soaked jeans just enough to reveal the spot, red and swelling, angry-looking. His fingers were gentle as he examined it, the warmth of his skin against mine making my breath catch for a reason that had nothing to do with pain. It's not a spider, he murmured, his voice low and focused. Looks more like a wasp or something. You're gonna bruise. I nodded, lips pressed together, trying not to focus on the press of his palm holding my thigh steady or how close his face was to my skin. But he looked up then, and our eyes met. My jeans still halfway down, his hand still on me, and everything stopped. There was no barn anymore. No thunder. Just that look. That pause. His hand stilled, but he didn't let go. And then, slowly, as if he wasn't sure if he was imagining it, he leaned in. And I didn't stop him. Our lips met, tentative and searching. A kiss that tasted like hesitation and rain and everything we'd kept buried in long glances and unfinished sentences. It wasn't rushed, it was reverent, like something earned in silence. When we pulled apart, I was breathless. My heart thundered harder than the storm outside. "I've been trying not to do that all week," he whispered, forehead pressed to mine. I closed my eyes. I know. We didn't say anything more. We didn't have to. The air between us had already said too much. That night, the storm passed, but something between us remained. No longer quiet, no longer hidden, just real.